The UK Government has committed to ensuring the non-diminution of certain equality and human rights in Northern Ireland as a result of Brexit. This commitment is contained in Article 2 of the Northern Ireland Protocol. The Equality Commission and the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission have set out their views on what rights and protections they consider fall within the scope of this UK Government's commitment. In our joint working paper on the scope of Protocol Article 2 that we published in December 2022, we set out in a table the range of EU law which we consider falls within the scope of this commitment. This table of EU law is of particular significance. It's significant because it provides greater clarity on the breadth of EU law that the Commissions consider fall within the scope of the UK Government's commitment. This clarity will help not only the Commissions in their work to hold the UK Government to account in terms of upholding its commitment, but it will also be of help to individuals and organisations in Northern Ireland who want to know more about which of their rights are protected post-Brexit. We have identified a range of EU law that has strengthened rights for different equality groups in Northern Ireland and which must not be reduced now that the UK has left the EU. This has included EU law that has strengthened rights for disabled people, women, minority ethnic people, older people, people of different sexual orientations, ages and religions in Northern Ireland. In particular, in the table, we've set out the EU law we have identified as underpinning each of the Good Friday Agreement rights that are affirmed in particular in the relevant chapter of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. So, for example, under the Good Friday Agreement right to equal opportunity in all social and economic activity across a number of equality grounds, we have listed all EU law that we consider underpins that right. There are some important points to note about the table. First, it only covers relevant EU law in force in Northern Ireland on or before the end of the Brexit transition period, namely the 31st of December 2020. Second, the EU measures listed in the table reflect those measures which we have identified as falling within the scope of Protocol Article 2 as at the date we published the table. So the table is therefore a living document and may be subject to change, not least in light of any judicial decisions on the matter. Lastly, it is important to note that not all parts or provisions of the EU law listed in the table may be relevant to the Good Friday Agreement right or within scope of the UK Government's commitment. We've also produced another table to complement the table of EU law, which we have published on our websites. In this second table, we've set out, in relation to each of the directives listed in the table of EU law, the domestic law in Northern Ireland that has given effect to that directive. In terms of some specific examples of the EU law that we have included in the table, these include the 6 EU equality directives listed in Annex 1 to the Protocol. In terms of what these 6 EU directives cover, they cover extensive equality rights across a range of areas. For example, they cover protection against discrimination and unfair treatment in the workplace across a range of equality grounds such as age, disability, religion and belief, race and gender and sexual orientation. But also critically, in relation to the grounds of race and gender, the scope is much wider and there's protection against discrimination not only at work but also includes protection in other areas. For example, when accessing day-to-day services such as healthcare. These are really important equality rights that strengthen protection for women, disabled people, minority ethnic people and other equality groups, which have come from the EU and which the UK Government has committed to ensuring are not diminished as a result of Brexit. Beyond the 6 EU equality directives listed in Annex 1 to the Protocol, there are other types of EU law that fall within the scope of the UK Government's commitment. For example, EU laws that have increased parental leave rights for working parents are also covered. So too are the rights of pregnant women in the workplace in terms of maternity leave and protection against unfair treatment under the Pregnant Workers Directive. The rights of victims, including victims of the Troubles under the EU Victims Directive, are also protected. EU laws that protect the rights of disabled people are also within scope of the commitment. The Commissions have identified extensive provisions across a range of EU laws that aim to protect the rights of disabled people, including in terms of standards of accessibility. These include, for example, EU laws that are designed to help and protect disabled people when travelling by air, train, bus, coach or boat. Other EU laws that we consider fall within the scope of the UK Government's commitment include EU laws that protect part-time workers and fixed-term workers against being treated unfairly, as well as rights that protect children from exploitation and that are aimed at protecting victims of trafficking. In addition to the Good Friday Agreement rights that are affirmed in particular in the relevant chapter of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, there's also a commitment to protect the civil rights and religious liberties of everyone in the community. In the table, the Commissions have set out some of the first examples of EU laws that we have identified so far as falling within the scope of this broader commitment to civil rights. These first examples include certain EU laws that strengthen the rights of asylum seekers, refugees, and rights relating to data protection. In conclusion, we have identified an extensive range of EU law that has strengthened equality and human rights here, including for different equality groups, rights which we consider are covered by the UK Government's commitment. We will work proactively, including with our partners, to hold the UK Government to account, so as to ensure that those rights are upheld and protected and are not reduced because of Brexit.